Hello everybody, in this episode I'm going to be covering the timeline or the sequence window down here. And first of all, we're going to show you how to generate an actual timeline. If you open up your project and there's nothing here, it says these quick little instructions, drop media to create a sequence. There's a couple ways you can do this. So I'm going to go under one of my folders here. I'm going to grab one of these clips here. I'm going to drag and drop over here, and it generates a sequence. Now one thing I want you to notice here is if we go over into this folder and I've got my preview area turned on, if I select this clip here, this video clip that's a red file, up here it's going to show some attributes. It's going to show a resolution and a frame rate right here. And when I drag that into the timeline, look what happened in the timeline here. It generated a timeline. Look at the timeline settings. It created a timeline that is the same resolution and the same frame rate. So just by simply grabbing and dragging a clip and dropping it into the timeline, it generates a timeline with the exact same settings as the clip. Now if you look over here, our timeline is inside of this red folder right here. It puts it right inside the red folder, and it also names it the exact same name as the clip that I dropped into it. So you usually don't want to do that. I'm gonna select this timeline. I'm gonna hit the return key, which will ask me to rename it. I'm gonna call this red. I'm just going to call it red for the red footage. Now I'm going to grab this here. I don't want it in this folder embedded inside this red folder. So you can simply grab it, drag it to the left, till that little no symbol disappears right there, and let go. And now it is outside of the red folder, and here is my timeline with the red footage in it. Now, if we want to create a Sony timeline, I showed you how to drag and drop over it in this area. If that area is not there and you already have a timeline open, one way you can do that is you can just simply arrow down, grab a clip, and look at this. This is a different resolution, 1920 by 1080, same frame rate. I'm going to grab this and drag it over this little new item icon right there and hold it. It shows this little plus icon come up, and you let go, and it generated a new timeline. And look at this timeline. It matches the settings of that clip. Usually this is the first thing you do when you create a new timeline, is you decide what resolution and what frame rate you want your timeline to be in, and you drag and drop a clip in it to create it, either by dragging and dropping to this little icon right here, or if there's nothing here, you can drag and drop it here in this area when there's no timeline showing up, and it will generate a new timeline. For this one, I'm going to have it selected, hit enter or return, and name this one Sony. So I have the Sony timeline and I have the red timeline. I'm going to grab this, drag it to the left, drop it out, and I have these two timelines there ready to go. Now there's also a way to generate a new timeline by going up to File, New, and Sequence. And when I say timeline, that is the exact same thing as sequence. They're basically the exact same things. A sequence is a sequence of shots that are in here, and it's also a timeline as well. So it's basically the same thing. So if I go New, Sequence, it's going to bring up this window. And it's going to ask me a bunch of different things. It's going to say, what type of timeline do you want? If you're working on DSLR, you can arrow this down and go 1920 by 1080. DSLR, there's 24 frames per second with 1920 by 1080. They have ones for AVC HD, one for area codecs, one for RED cameras, one for HDV. See, I pretty much never go into this window here. Very rarely will I go into this window here because, I mean, you can choose which one you want. DV, NTSC, ancient stuff there, and hit OK, and it will generate a new timeline based on those settings. Now, say I select this, 720 by 480, different pixel aspect ratio, and different frame rate, pretty much at 30 frames per second interlaced there. I'm going to select that and delete it. The best way to generate a new timeline is by just grabbing the clip that you want, dragging it to this new item icon, let go, and it will drop, and it will create a new timeline. Okay, right now I've got these two timelines open. You can simply go over to these tabs, and it goes to the red timeline, or it goes to the Sony timeline, whatever one you click on there. So if we want to close those, you can actually hit this little X right there to close it, or you can hit Control or Command W, and it will close that timeline window. And if I do that again and close this one, hit X or Control or Command W, closes that, and then now it brings up no sequences right here. Well, how do I get back to my sequences now? You go over here to this project window, find your sequences, and just simply double click on them. And it reloads them over here. And now you have those separate tabs. The red timeline and the Sony, you can generate as many timelines as you want and have as many tabs up here as you want as well. One thing I want to demonstrate under the preferences here, I'm going to go to Edit and Preferences, and we're going to go to General. I showed this in an earlier episode, but now I want to show it in more of a practical sense here. We've got this default scale to frame size checkmarked. If you have that checkmarked as you import footage, it will add that default scale to frame size to the footage that you have imported. I'm going to uncheck this right now. And I'm going to import some more Sony footage here. I'm going to go to my media browser. I'm just going to import one clip here. This is my Sony footage, which is 1920 by 1080. I'm going to right click and hit import. Go back to the project. There it is, separate from this folder right here. Actually, the exact same file that I've already imported, but I imported it again outside this folder, and I had that default scale to frame size unchecked. Watch what happens. I'm going to go to the red timeline, which is essentially a 4K timeline. The 1920 by 1080 resolution is half the resolution. Watch what happens as I grab this and drag it into this red timeline here, and I move into it. Look at that. It is actually 1920 by 1080, and it is much smaller than the 4K footage, so it is putting it in at its actual size into a 4K timeline, and you have all this extra space right out here. If you want to make this fit, you can right click on that clip and say scale to frame size, and it does that. Since this is a different aspect ratio from the red footage, this is 16 by 9 and the red footage is 1.89 to 1, then this here, you get what's called pillar box on the side. The letterbox is when it's on the top and bottom. Right here on the side, this is called pillar box. So that adds, this fits it as best possible. I mean, later on you can actually go to your effects controls, and we'll show how to do this in a future episode, and you can scale here and make that fit into a wider aspect ratio. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to get rid of this clip here. And the footage that I imported, well, let's go to Edit, Preferences, General, and checkmark our default scale to frame size. Hit OK. And now any footage that I import now will have that check marked. It'll default the scale to the frame size. If I grab this Sony footage, this was imported with that check marked. So watch this now as I grab a clip and drag it in here. Look how it does the pillar box. It zooms it up and fits it into this as best it can without zooming out of the actual frame size here in this wider aspect ratio. Now if I import some red footage that's 4K footage, let's go to the Sony and kind of do the opposite. So first of all, I'm on my Sony timeline. I'm going to go up to Edit, Preferences, General, and uncheck that default to scale frame size again. Hit OK. Let's import a red clip. That's one of my red clips I just imported with the default to scale frame size unchecked. Grab this and drag it into my timeline. And as I play through it, look at this, it's actually zoomed up on the clip here. The 4K is going outside the window because this is a small resolution, so it just puts it in at its regular size. If you right click on this and say scale to frame size, it fits it in, and look at that, it has letterbox because it is a wider aspect ratio. So if I delete that there, delete it here, and this red footage was imported when I had that default scale to frame size check marked. I'm going to check mark it again, hit OK, grab a red clip, drag it in, and look what it does. Grab a red clip, drag it in, look what it does. It automatically fits it to this window. It downscales it to fit in that window there because I had that check marked. So my general recommendation is to keep this check marked most of the time. Most of the time this is doing what you need it to do. There might be some instances you'll find where you might not want to have that check marked. Okay, I'm going to delete everything out of my Sony clips here. I'm going to go down to, let's just go to my Sony. I'm going to grab this whole folder. I'm going to drag and drop it into the timeline. So I have a whole bunch of clips here in my timeline. So now you'll notice I've got all these clips down in here. I'm going to zoom out by hitting minus up at the top of the keyboard and show my entire timeline here. We'll talk about zooming in and out in a minute. But as I grab this here is my playhead. My playhead is going to be going from clip to clip to clip. As I grab this playhead with my mouse and drag it, this is called scrubbing here. As I'm grabbing this playhead, I'm scrubbing it across these video clips down here. So we can scrub back and forth and show any of those video clips just by grabbing that and moving it back and forth. Now, if we want to play a video clip down here, what we have to do is just hit the space bar. It's kind of the same as your source monitor up here. So all I have to do, I'm going to click on my timeline here, and it is highlighted. And by the way, you can get to your timeline by doing Shift 3. If I'm in another window, Shift 3 will jump me to my timeline. I'm going to hit space bar to play and space bar to pause. Now the JKL keys also function in this exact same manner as they do in the source monitor window. So once we're down here, you can hit J. J will rewind, K will stop, L will go forward. So if you're trying to find a certain clip here, what you can do is you can hit J, and then you hit J again, and again, and again, and again, like 4 or 5 times until it just speeds up and kind of maxes out the speed there. You hit L once, it goes 100% forward. L again, it goes forward faster, then faster, 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 until you hit it a bunch of times and it's maxed out, and now it's going through at its max speed, moving through the footage here. Now some other quick ways of navigating in your timeline here are your arrow keys. Your arrow keys, left and right, will go through your timeline one frame at a time. I'm hitting arrow left here and it's going backwards. If I hit arrow right, it'll go forward one frame at a time. Here I'm hitting arrow, 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 arrow right, arrow, 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 arrow. Yeah, there you go. An arrow left, backwards one frame at a time as I keep hitting it. Now to navigate between clips here, what you can do is your arrows up and down. Watch this. It'll land on the beginning and ends of edit points or clips here. As you hit arrow up, it goes to the left. Look how my playhead is jumping to the left here. And as I arrow down, it'll jump to the right. It'll land on these edit points going to the right. Same as the source monitor, as you hit the home key, it'll jump to the beginning of the timeline. And as you hit the end key, it'll jump to the very end. And down here what we've got is we've got stacked tracks basically. We've got our video tracks up here. These V1, V2, V3 are all your video tracks, and you can add as many as you want by right-clicking in here and adding tracks, and you can keep adding tracks on top of each other. Same as the audio tracks. These are the audio tracks down here. These audio track 1, 2, 3. If we right-click down here, we can add tracks down there as well. Now the way the video stacking works here is you can use it for compositing, but you can also stack clips on top of each other. And this helps for editing as well. If I'm going to pull this down, I'm going to grab a clip here out of my bin and drag it. And I'm going to drag it in. It's going to be on the same level as my V1 over here as it already is. If I drop it there, it just eats over everything. But if I grab this clip and put it on top, like this, I just move the mouse up so it does it on top. Let's trim this down a little bit. We're going to get into trimming later, but let me show what happens. As we play through this, watch what happens. This clip that I put on top, as we play through that, when it hits this, it's going to cut to that clip. So there, it cut to this clip on top, and when it gets finished here, as I move to the end here, and it gets past that, it's going to jump down back to this clip. There we go. It jumps down back to this edit here. So whatever is on top takes over basically. It's like laying one piece of paper, one picture over the top of the other. This is on top of this, so it is showing this one right here. If I delete that, it'll show what's going on below it. Let's delete it, and it's got that new frame below it there. And down here you've got your stacked audio tracks as well. What it will do, it does not take preference one over the other. If you have another audio track down here, it's going to play all those audio clips at the exact same time. So it's a little bit different than video. Okay, now I want to talk about track height. That's basically, you can see right now these tracks here are fairly flat. And by flat I mean they're very small, very short, and you can't really see what's on them. And what's on them, I mean, you can see a thumbnail once these things get larger. So let's show a couple different ways of making things larger on your timeline. If you hold down the Shift key and hit the plus or minus on the top of your keyboard, not on the numpad, but on the top of your keyboard, holding down Shift and plus, look what happens. It increases the track height to what's called a standard track height here. If you hit Shift minus, it takes it down to kind of this standard collapsed track height. This takes it down as about as small as it gets here. And watch what happens when you hit Shift plus, it does it to both audio and video. Now you can see audio waveforms down here, and you can see a thumbnail going across this video clip here, so you can kind of tell what's on those video clips. You can't see them if it's zoomed out so much that these clips are so small. I will show you how to get around that in a second here. Another way of controlling your track height individually, if you don't want to do it to everything, is you can move your mouse over a video track or an audio track, and you scroll your mouse up or you scroll it down, and it increases and decreases your track height. If I come down to the audio and do that, and scroll up and down, it will increase and decrease my track height there. And if you want to standardize everything again, Shift plus, and it takes it back to normal, or Shift minus takes it back to the collapsed track height. A couple shortcuts here. First of all, Control or Command plus and minus. Watch what that does. Hit Control plus, Control minus, it increases video track heights. It increases all the video track heights. If I hit Option or Alt plus and minus, it increases the audio track height or decreases the audio track height. So Control or Command will increase your video, with the plus or minus will increase your video track height, and Alt or Option plus or minus will increase and decrease all the audio tracks. Or you can just use your mouse and scroll over like this, or Shift plus and minus. Now first of all, if you need to kind of zoom in and out of your clips here to kind of see, notice how we don't see these tracks, these thumbnails right there. I'm going to hit arrow up, which will move this to the left, these edits to the left several times. And now when I'm right here on this edit, say I want to scroll up and look at that. You can use these little nodes down here that they have, and you can zoom out your timeline or zoom in your timeline to get closer to those clips. And then you can really see the waveforms and the thumbnails. And now we're zoomed up on these video clips here. You can grab that once again, zoom out, or scroll it to the other direction to the left to zoom in. I hardly ever use that because I just use either the plus or minus key, and watch what happens. As I hit minus, it zooms out. I hit plus, it zooms in. I'm not hitting any modifier keys, I'm just hitting plus and minus to do that. Now if you want to see your timeline, your entire timeline all at once, all you have to do is hit the backslash that's above the return key. If you hit slash above the return key, it shows your entire timeline. So once again, you can zoom in, zoom out, and slash shows your entire timeline. Now, what will happen sometimes if people aren't getting used to hitting the slash above the return key is sometimes people will export out a video and they'll think it's like a 30-second or a 1-minute video, but their clip ends up being maybe like 30, 40 minutes long, and they have no idea why. This is usually why. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to grab a little clip right here. When people get editing in their timeline, I'm going to do Control-C and copy, hit my slash key to zoom out here. I'm going to go minus a couple times. I'm going to move way out here, down my timeline, way down my timeline here, and I'm going to do Control-V. Sometimes when people get kind of crazy editing and stuff and they get really in the mode, they won't realize they might have a stray clip at the very end of their timeline. So at first, what it may look like they're viewing is just this, their movie right here. But what they don't realize sometimes is there is a stray clip clear the freak down here. And the way you can see that, the way you can kind of test that is just quickly hit slash. If there is something, it's going to zoom in the whole timeline and show you if there is any. See if there are any stray clips out there. I'm going to select that, delete, hit slash again, and now this is just my entire timeline. Let's go through these little icons here at the top of our timeline here. Right here, this is what's called insert and overwrite sequences as nests or individual clips. What this means is if you have a couple different timelines here, I've got this one called clips and stuff. I know they're very exciting names, but my stuff timeline only has like 4 individual clips that I've edited in here. And say I want to move that in here. I want to grab this and move this. You can grab a timeline and shove it inside of another timeline here. And it will bring this, what's called this nest of clips here. This represents your other timeline here. If you double click on that, it opens up that timeline. It's referencing this other timeline here. And this brought it in as a nest of clips, which is basically its own sequence here with a whole bunch of clips edited together in it. If we uncheck this here, so it's blue now, and I grab this timeline and drag it over, look what it does. It brings the timeline over, but now it brings them over as individual clips and just basically copies those clips into the timeline. So they're not nested together as a sequence. Next is the snap tool. Snap tool is very important for moving clips around in a timeline. Let's say we've got these clips here. I've got these clips here selected. I'm going to drag this around. I'm going to try to get this close to this clip and put it at the end of this clip here to the left. And look what it does. Right now with the snap turned on, it gets kind of close and it snaps to it. This works with trimming and editing as well. The snap tool will help trim things to your playhead or trim it to an adjacent clip. Now if we turn this off, watch this. I have these three clips here. I'm going to move them and I'm going to just kind of eyeball it and drop it. And it looks like it's pretty close to that clip there. Might be butted up against it. I can see it right here, the little slit. If we go to that and zoom up, notice there's a big gap there. As it plays from one clip to the next,
okay, yeah, what we did.
There's a big gap there. So your snap helps avoid that. When you're zoomed way out like this and you can't see how close that is, the snap will help you. Let's turn the snap on. It'll help you snap to the edge right there. Make sure there's no black frames in between. What this next button does here is linked selection. This will unlink your video and audio in your timeline. If they're already linked together, watch this. As I select a video, notice it selects the audio as well. This audio here belongs to that video or and vice versa. Now if I click unlink here, now watch what happens. If I click on just the video, it selects just the video. If I select the audio, it selects just the audio. I can hit delete and clear and get rid of the audio and it leaves the video in there. I'm going to undo that, turn my link back on. This here is similar to the source monitor where you can add markers on your timeline and make notes. I will have a separate episode on markers, a future episode. But if you hit M, it adds a marker, M adds another marker, and you can double click on these and add notes and comments and name those markers. And this wrench tool here is a timeline display settings. This is what you click on this and it will show certain things to display in your timeline. Video keyframes is kind of important for opacity. We're going to cover this later, but you can turn the opacity up and down by turning on what's called video keyframes. And this video is becoming transparent. You can also tell it to show audio names. Right now it's not showing the audio names by default. It's showing the video names. One important thing here is showing your through edits. If you do what a through edit is if you put a cut on an actual in the middle of a clip here, it's called a redundant edit as well. If I do Control K and cut that clip right there, notice these two little arrows that point toward each other. Those two arrows that are pointing toward each other means that this frame here, if I arrow back one frame, belongs to the subsequent frame. It belongs to the next frame there. That means that this is a through edit. It means it's a redundant edit and it doesn't necessarily have to be there. It might have happened accidentally or it might be intentional depending on what you're trying to do. But you can, now that you know that that's there, you can right click on this and say join through edits and it gets rid of that redundant edit. And there are other items in here you can kind of go through. Those are the more important items on this list here. And for the last part, I'm going to click on this little drop-down menu next to your timeline name, and you'll see some other items in here. Of course, you got all the standard, the close and undock panel, but as we move down some of the more important things, some of the options that you'll have under here is like your start time, that's the time code that your timeline starts on. We can talk about that here in a minute. And also video head and tail thumbnails and continuous video thumbnails. You have different visuals on your video clips as you hit this video head and tail. That shows the thumbnails at the beginning and at the end, the beginning frame and the end frame. I usually have it on standard as video head thumbnails, which is pretty standard. But if you do this, it'll do continuous video thumbnails. It shows continuous video thumbnail update throughout the clip. This is kind of confusing because these can kind of look like edits. I kind of like the video head thumbnails. Now this down here is called your time code. And like I said, you can choose a start time. By default, the start time is going to be at 0. Some people like to put it at 1 hour if they want it to be the first hour of a television broadcast, or 2 hours if it's the second hour, and so on. But this right here is your, let's move it in a little bit. This is going to be how many hours it is. This is going to be minutes, this is going to be seconds, and this is going to be frames. When the frames get up to, if it's 24 frames per second, it'll get up to 23, it will reset to 0, and this will update to the next second. This gets up to 59, resets to 0, and updates the minute, and so on. Okay, next we've got locks down here on our timeline. These little locks right here, if you click on a lock, that means that track cannot be touched. If you watch this, if we hit Control A, select all, and hit delete, it deletes the audio and doesn't touch anything up here. I'm going to undo that and I'll unlock that, but you can lock certain tracks to make sure that nothing will be touched. You got to be careful if you're deleting sometimes, because sometimes it will ripple delete your audio or something and put things out of sync, so you kind of have to be conscious of that and careful about what you're doing. Right here you got these eyeballs. Basically what these eyeballs do is you click on it and it turns that track off. If you have multiple tracks, you can turn another video track off and you will not see anything in that track. On your audio down here, you've got mute and solo. If you have several audio tracks, in fact, I'm going to grab one of these and pull them down to some of the other audio tracks here just to demonstrate this. If we hit mute on this track right here, notice we play and nothing is playing on this track. As we get to the next track,
sound ready?
That one is playing because it is not on mute. And this one will play as well. Now if we hit S, that means it will only play that track there. Notice as we play this thing, it has no audio there. As we move to this track, it plays just that one and doesn't play this one down here. You can solo more than one. You can say I want to solo this one, and now it would play just those two tracks and nothing else. Okay, this last one right here is toggle sync lock. What this does is it locks everything on this track. If you do what's called a ripple delete. Watch this. I'm going to select this clip and I'm going to hit Option or Alt delete, and it deletes that clip and it pulls everything over to fill the gap. That is called a ripple delete. I'm going to undo that. Now if we toggle sync, let's say this audio track right here, and that's this audio track right here, and I select just this clip and I hit Option delete and ripple delete, notice it left everything on this track alone. It left it all there, and it moved and it rippled everything that wasn't turned on. So if I've got these two here, I've got these toggle sync tracks turned off right there. If I select this clip up here on this top track and hit Option delete, look what it does. It ripple deletes just that one and leaves these two alone and leaves everything else in sync here and not moving those. So that's kind of an important function at times. These blue buttons are basically what tracks are active here. If you're going to copy and paste something, it takes precedent with things on top and things on the bottom down here. These little icons here are called track targeting. If you select a clip and you copy it, if I hit this one and hit Control C to copy and I want to move it over here, watch what happens. First of all, when these tracks are activated, it will always, if it has multiple tracks selected like this, it'll always default to the innermost tracks, the V1 and A1. It'll kind of suck into this point right here. So watch this, I hit Control V and it pastes and it puts it on the video track 1 and audio track 1. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to turn these ones off, and now what happens, it'll automatically default to the next one closest to the center, V1 and A2. And undo that. I go here and here, turn those off, and it sends it out to these outer ones out there. So that's basically called track targeting. Also kind of is activating tracks. And the last thing I'm going to cover is basically timeline settings. If you go over to these icons in here, these are your timelines. So if we right click on this and go to sequence settings, it's going to bring up some items here showing, first of all, your editing mode, kind of what codec or what quality, what sort of clips you're editing in here. Then you've got a time base. This is your frame rate. This is very important. If you change this, it's going to really mess things up. And I already set the sequence based on the clip settings. You have your pixel aspect ratio. It shows your frame size, which cannot be changed once you drop a clip into it. And you can tell it also what to preview your clips at, what quality to preview your clips at. You can also change the frequency of your audio. If you're trying to export your project to be audio mix, sometimes you want to up the quality of your audio. If if your audio was recorded at a higher hertz like this with a higher bit depth, then you can turn that back up and export it out, and it will maintain that quality from the original clips. So that is the timeline. That's a whole lot of information we covered there, a whole lot of things that happens down here. The next episode we'll be covering the program window up here.